All right. Thanks everyone for coming. I'm Paul Connecton, our CMO here at Beeswax, and I'd like to introduce our co-founder and chief product officer, Shamim Samadi. Shamim is a 10-year veteran product manager for ad tech at Google. Shamim has worked on a wide variety of innovative products, including AdWords, AdSense, and DoubleClick. And most recently, he led Google's products for programmatic video, including the DoubleClick Ad Exchange and DoubleClick Bid Manager. And then, of course, he went on to found Beeswax. So without any further ado, I will turn it over to Shamim, who will tell you all about our new feature, delivery models.
Thanks, everyone, for joining. This is Shamim. Really excited about this new feature, delivery models, and let's jump into it. So I will sort of cover an overview of what the product is and what problems we're solving with it. I'll go through a couple example use cases. I'll dig into some of the specifics of how it works under the hood. And then we'll get to some FAQs, and at the end we'll do some open Q&A. So as you have questions throughout, please add them into the Q&A section of Zoom. To kick it off, I think most folks are familiar with the notion of optimizing your bid price, right? And so we've launched a lot of products and solutions around this with bid models and bid modifiers and even bidding agents for the most sophisticated customers. And bid optimization tries to answer what CPM should I bid on this given inventory. So in this simple example, I'm bidding a different amount for different sites. So we're all very familiar with that. The new concept and the new solution we're offering is what we're calling delivery models, which is around optimizing the delivery to the inventory that meets your goal. So instead of thinking about price, it's how much budget should I spend on the inventory. So I may want to spend as much as possible on site A because it's performing better or just hitting my KPI, and as little as possible as site C. And I want to control that irrespective of my bid price. That's what delivery models aims to solve, is controlling that delivery independent of bid price. So that's a high level sort of what we're trying to solve with the feature. And talking through some common delivery goals, and you should think through this as I go through these questions. What are your delivery goals that you have as a business? But some common ones we've heard are, hey, I want to stop running so much of my budget on the big mediocre sites, right? I run a campaign, post-campaign, I look at the results, and a lot of the spend is on high volume but mediocre sites. And so that's a typical thing that we hear from customers. Another thing we hear is I want to fulfill my deal ID budget before buying exchange inventory, open exchange inventory. So there's some notion of premiumness of inventory, whether it's through deals or some other mechanism, and I want to spend more of my budget on that than open exchange. And another very common one we hear is on delivering to the sites or apps that are performing best, right? So in a typical manual optimization strategy, different sites and apps are performing differently. You want to push more of your budget to the sites or apps that are performing better. And I'll go through this as an example. This is a common thing that we hear. And so one more conceptual thing before I get into sort of the use cases and how we solve it. But this is sort of a fundamental thing, which we think delivery is an optimization problem, not sort of a manual operational problem. And the reason for that is twofold. One is, as we all know, it's operationally hard to manage your budget delivery with line items. So what you typically do is, if you want to control delivery, you create a new line item with some, targeting, some subset of your targeting, and you allocate budget to it, and you sort of do that over and over. And so what you end up having is many line items, each with their own budget. And with things like managing frequency caps and other things, this becomes operationally burdensome. So that's one problem. The second problem is that we believe humans won't optimally allocate budget to that inventory because inventory availability is dynamic. So what I mean by that is, inventory that's available today may not be the same that's tomorrow, and therefore doing it manually, you'll end up with a suboptimal outcome. And just a couple of examples of this, some things typical traders will do. If you use the line item method of creating a new line item and allocating budget to it, two things typically happen. You'll either under allocate budget because budget acts as a cap. You may be capping yourself on more inventory that's available. So that's a common thing. Another is over allocation. And what happens when you over allocate budget is that if you want your campaign to deliver in full, you will need to realize that there's not enough inventory and then redistribute that budget to the other line items to ensure that you hit your overall budget. And that sort of exacerbates the first problem, which is you have a bunch of these line items and you have to manage them. And so, delivery models aims at doing two things. We want to optimize delivery, and we want to ensure full campaign delivery. So you could do one of those things, but typically customers want to do both. They want to optimize delivery and they want to ensure full campaign delivery as well. And so how do we do that? Let's get into a couple of common use cases. So the first use case is around allocating delivery to specific inventory goals. So let me talk about the typical approach first. So the typical approach, let's say I wanted to deliver $5,000 to my owned and operated inventory, and then $4,000 to deals, and then $1,000 to open exchange. I would set up 3 different line items targeting those inventory sources and give each of those line items a budget cap, right? So that's what you typically do. A common outcome would be that you would under deliver. So because in this example, there was not enough owned and operated inventory or deals inventory, I didn't fulfill my budget on those line items and therefore did not fulfill my overall campaign budget, right? That's a very typical thing. And in order to solve that, you would have to manually redistribute stuff, which you would do in a suboptimal way typically. So that's the typical approach. With delivery models, the idea is you have a single line item that handles sort of the overall budget. And there's this separate object, which we call the delivery model, which as customers, you can express how you want the to weight the different sort of inventory subsegments. So in this case, my owned and operated, I'm weighting it as a 5, deals 4, and open exchange is 1. So you've told us how you want to distribute that $10,000 budget. We'll convert those those values into sort of target percentages. So we would turn that into, and I'll go through an example later, but we would convert that into 50%, 40%, and 10%. And then what we would do is our system would pace towards that target budget. And if it found that it was unable to fulfill the budget for any one of these rows, it would redistribute the budget to the other rows. So in this case, the budget that we could not spend on owned and operated and deals got redistributed over time to that open exchange row, and we were able to deliver the budget in full. So there's a few concepts here. I'll go through it in some more depth in a subsequent slide. That's one common use case is around controlling delivery to inventory sources. A second use case is more around driving better performance. So independently of, hey, I have more premium inventory, there's just inventory that I post campaign or mid flight of the campaign that I see is performing better than others. So in this, let me just explain this sort of chart briefly. So on the y-axis on the right, I have my CPA. So my goal CPA as an advertiser, let's say, is an $8 CPA. The left y-axis is the media spend and the x-axis are, individual sites. And so this is what you would typically see. There's some sites that are performing amazing CPA but lower volume, other sites that are delivering under my CPA just by a hair, and accounting for a lot of volume. And what that does is the big sites are actually bringing up the average CPA, even though they're below the goal, right? Like sites K, L, and I, they're just dragging down your overall CPA. And what you want to do is you want to deliver more of your budget to the sites that are performing really well, but you're spending less budget on. So with delivery models, you could accomplish just that. So that's a separate use case on performance. So let me go into one level deeper on how it works, just to reiterate what's happening sort of under the hood. So the first thing you do is you specify the features and the corresponding values for those features. So this is a really simple example where I've chosen one feature of domain. You can specify multiple features, but in this case, I have a single feature and I've given it a value. As you see here, what we do is we normalize it into a target percent, right? So we ensure that things add up to 100% by normalizing it. So in this case, we do the math and we translate that to 50, 40, and 10%. I could have equally put in 5, 4, and 1 or some multiple of that, and it would have resulted in the same target percent. So that's sort of the second step. The third step is we will pace towards that target budget, and again, dynamically reallocate budget. So think of each row as we will take that target percent and multiply it by the line item budget. That'll give us a target budget. And we'll try to pace towards that target budget for that row. And if we're under delivering, we'll dynamically reallocate that budget to other rows, and that'll continue over time until we sort of reach the optimal mix, right? We'll do our best to hit the target, and if we can't, we'll go to the other rows. It's also worth noting that when you set up a delivery model through the Buzz workflow, you also set up a default weight, which is similar to like a default bid price that we have on bid models, where if one of the rows don't match, then the default weight is what applies. So it's kind of a catch-all weight for all inventory that is not expressed in the model. So that's a bit more detail about how it works. In terms of activating delivery models, there are 2 ways to activate. I'll talk through each one. The first is you uploaded the actual delivery model itself. So this is, if you're familiar with bid models, almost the exact same workflow where you upload a manifest file that describes the features that you're using. You upload the model file itself to S3. And when you use a delivery model, you can use multiple features. So in this example, simple example, I've chosen 2 features, hour of day and domain list ID. So this is the ID of the list, the domain list that you've set up in Buzz. A couple of things to note also, in addition to be able, that you could express multiple features, you can have up to 100 rows, and we'll talk about this a bit later. We think that almost all use cases can be accomplished with 100 rows, given that we support lists and other high cardinality sort of features. And so you can have up to 100 rows, but multiple features within a delivery model. And the value is what we interpret as the delivery weight, right? So that's very, very similar to bid models, with the exception of the row limit, and that we interpret the value as a delivery weight instead of a bid or a bid multiplier. That's the first way. The second way is to do it via what we call terms in the Buzz UI. So this follows, very closely the bid modifier workflow. where in the UI, you can create a modifier, and then you can, in the UI, specify the features. So when you use a delivery modifier, the additional limitation is that you can use a single feature, but you can have many terms for that single feature. So in this example, I've created a delivery modifier, and I have 3 domain lists: my high performing domains, my medium, and my low. And I can express that directly in the UI without the need for uploading model. So, as you think through how you're going to use a delivery model, you should, one sort of decision point is, hey, do I need a single feature like domain or apps? And if so, then I could express it in the UI. If I have multiple features, then you should express it via a model that you upload via the model workflow. So let me go through a few FAQs, and then we'll open it up to your questions. So first off, is there a fee to use delivery models? Answer is no. It's a free feature available to any customer who wants to use it. Another question is, how is this different from targeting? So, targeting determines what is eligible to be served. Delivery models works after targeting to spread the impressions across the available inventory. So targeting is a superset, and then delivery models controls delivery within your targeting. Is this a replacement for pacing? So it's not a replacement to pacing, but it can be thought of as an enhancement where it gives customers more control over the inventory that they deliver to while we could adhere to the pacing and delivery goals. So it is optional to be used. It is important to note that in order to use delivery models, it can only be used on line items which are paced by Beeswax. So you need to enable pacing on a line item in order to associate a delivery model to that line item. So that's one important requirement. Another one is, can I use delivery models with my own bidding agent? The answer is yes. So even customers who have a bidding agent can use delivery models, but you must enable pacing on your custom strategy. So sort of similar answer to the previous question, which is it has to be paced in order for us to apply the delivery model. And the last one is around why is there a limit of 100 rows for delivery model? So there's not a technical limitation, but we think, and we would be open to feedback as customers use the feature, but we think that nearly all use cases can be expressed with 100 rows or less. Controlling delivery is very different than controlling bids. You want to do it on less granular things. And since we support things like custom lists, where you can create lists of deal IDs and domains and apps and zip codes, et cetera, we think that you'll be able to express a delivery model with 100 rows or less, but certainly open to feedback on that as you all use the feature. So with that, one more thing, we'll send this out afterwards, but there's a bunch of resources available in our technical documentation around the API, the fields that are supported in delivery models. So we have a public Google sheet which explains which fields are available in delivery models versus bid models. That's all been updated and is accurate. So if you have any questions on the fields that are supported or not, you can refer to that document. And our help documentation is up to date with how to create delivery models and delivery modifiers as well. And lastly, it is available now. So if you want it enabled, you can just contact your Beeswax account team and we will turn the feature on for you.
All right. Thank you, Shamim. So we will go to questions. Just as a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question, there is a little Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen in the Zoom interface. And you can go ahead and type in a question there. And don't worry, we won't use your full name, but we might address you by your first name. So before we dive into your questions, I have a question. So Shamim, tell me, can you use bid models and delivery models simultaneously to optimize to 2 separate things? How does that work?
Yeah, it's good questions. The answer is yes. So we've built the system such that you can have a bid model, which is controlling your price. and then a delivery model, which is controlling your delivery. So you could think of them as two parts of the optimization problem, and you may express them differently. So an example is, that example of performance. There's two ways of sort of bringing your CPA down. One is you could bid differently on the different sites, right? So you value the different sites differently. You may need to bid a different price in order to win a more competitive site. So you can control that with a bid model. But then you have the second dimension, which is irrespective of price, I want to deliver more to the sites that are delivering the best CPA, and you can control that with the delivery model.
All right. So thank you. That was a really great answer. Helped me understand how that works, even though I've been working on this product for a little while. This is a question from Shelly. How is this different from DCPM, or dynamic CPM?
How is this different from dynamic CPM? So I think you're referring to we have a pacing algorithm, which is optimized CPM, where we will change the CPM in order to control pacing. So it's different in that, so you can use this in conjunction with our optimized CPM, our dynamic CPM. So you can you could turn that feature on and we will pace. And in that scenario, we can reduce your bid prices in order to control pacing. But you can also add on a delivery model on top of pacing to further control the delivery to your target inventory.
All right. And we have a question from Delayla. What is the time scale for these delivery models? i.e., if a line item cannot find enough inventory from a site I've given the highest weight, will all those impressions on lower weighted sites serve all at once at the end of the day?
Yeah, it's a good question. So our system, and this is something we will tune over time, but it's a balance of, we give the line item enough time to learn. So let's say every few hours, you don't want to update and redistribute budget based off of activity of a very short time window, because inventory can change, for example, between morning and night. We all know that's a very common thing. So what we do is we look several times a day if it's a lifetime paced line, or many more times if it's daily paced. And we'll observe how it's performing over that longer time horizon, and then we'll dynamically allocate budget to the line items that or the rows that are sort of ahead or hitting their allocation, and we'll do that dynamically many times. So this is not like we do it all at once. We're doing it throughout the day several times. But we're doing it on long enough time horizon so that we're not making sort of short-sighted decisions. And that's something that we're going to continue to tune over time. Like, that's one of the tuning mechanisms that we have to improve this over time.
Okay, here's a question from JM. Does the weight have a maximum number? Can we put expected dollars in there instead of a small number?
So there is a max, but I believe it's a 100 or 1,000. We can refer to the documentation, but think of it as you cannot express it as a target budget, but you have to sort of do the math in order to convert it into a target budget. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but two parts. It must be a weight. It cannot be a target budget, and the max I believe is 100 or 1,000. We can follow up in the documentation.
Okay, this question is from Franco. How do you know if inventory is limited for a certain line item? Is it some kind of quote unquote proof and error method among different days?
Yes. So it's similar to sort of how our pacing works, which is it's a control system where we create a target, and we can calculate, hey, if we want to hit that target, that let's say on O&O in the example that I gave, if we want to hit that target, that means we actually need to be spending, X amount of impressions or spend per minute or per period of time in order to hit that target rate. So you sort of observe over many cycles how you're sort of pacing towards that target budget. And if you learn that you're way under or over, then you can adjust that like a control system. So you could then reduce the target budget by redistributing to other line items and so on and so forth.
All right. A question from Zubin. How can I feed the bid modifier based on metric from the campaign as it unfolds?
So how can I feed the bid modifier, or like the delivery modifier? So, so there's not, it's a good question, something, we're thinking about doing in the roadmap in terms of, automatically doing that on behalf of customers. So customers could tell us, hey, can you automatically sort of control delivery based off of what you are observing in the campaign mid-flight. So we can't do that, but what you can do is literally mid-flight observe delivery, like where's delivery going, and then mid-flight upload a delivery model or delivery terms. So the typical workflow is, either use past campaigns as indicative of future campaigns, or use the existing campaigns and run it mid-flight.
All right. This question from Franco. Is it possible that assigning more budget to a certain line item because it was performing well may damage its quality while scaling?
Is it possible to? So yes, I think that's possible. I think it's one of those, I think what is implicit in the question is, does buying more of the site guarantee that it will perform just as well? The answer is no. Like, there's not a guarantee that if a site is performing, that if you push more budget to it, that it'll maintain, for example, that CPA. The CPA could rise, but it's one of those things that you can monitor and experiment with.
Okay, follow-up question from JM. Regarding the dynamic reallocation done many times a day, will the line item learn from day to day, or will it reset and try to respect the weights on every new day?
So it's not, the way to think about it is it's not based off of, it's not a daily thing, it's an ongoing thing. So it is making its decisions based off of what it has observed in the previous time period. So if it, and again, we're tuning this, but if it learned something in the last 6 hours, its decision to redistribute will be based off of what it has learned in the last 6 hours. And then it may learn something different in the subsequent 6 hours and then reallocate differently. So it doesn't have a sort of daily reset or a sort of historical view. It is making decisions based off of the previous period and what it's observed. So just like a control system, it'll constantly improve and get closer to that target over time.
Okay, question from Steve. So since we have removed the need to have multiple line items with different targeting, what is a use case if you have different geos with the same amount of budget for each? Can you give the same weight to each of the geos?
Can you give the same weight to each of the geos? Yes, you could do that. So I think so the use case, I think, is you have different line items with different geo targeting and different budgets. I think I understand the question. I think the question is, instead of like, can I kind of control, is there a use case where I'm using this almost as just an operational workaround? Instead of creating multiple line items, I create one. And the answer is yes. That's not the sort of intended use, if you will. But it is a good use case that we haven't thought about, which is, I create one line item, and it's not so much about managing and optimizing delivery. It's sort of allocating budget through this other object. So yes, that absolutely works. That would reduce the burden because you'd have a single line item. So that makes sense.
All right, we have a question from Maxime. could you assign a delivery value against, let's say, a list of domains and another value for everything else that is not in the list of domains?
Yes, you can. So the way that you do that, we didn't talk about. There's two ways to do that. If that was the simple use case, you could do it via the default weight. So when you create a delivery model, either in the UI or via model, there's a notion of a default weight, which is the weight to apply to everything that does not match the model. So in that case, you would have like a single row with domain list, and then your default value would be everything else. So that's one way of doing it. There's also a notion for sort of the more advanced users of wildcards, which we support in bid models, which is another way of doing that. So if you could not express, if it was a more complicated use case where there were sort of multiple versions of that, let's say it's domain list and geo or something are the features, and you wanted to have sort of two notions of the default, you could do that with a delivery model with the wildcard feature, which is documented in our documentation.
Okay, and we have one last question coming from Drew. When using a delivery model on domains, what if you only want to reprioritize a small number of domains, 5 to 10 domains main priority and 5 to 10 to avoid spending, but then don't mind how the other domains are bid on? Do you need to add these quote unquote uncared about domains to your delivery model in order for it to bid on them still?
So the answer is it's a similar answer to the previous question, which is you don't need to add them to the delivery model, but you do need to assign a weight to them. So in your example, you could have you have 5 or 10 sites. You may give it a weight of 5, and you have another set of sites that you give a weight of 3, and then for everything else, again, these are sites that are still within your targeting. You could assign a default weight of 1, and what that would do is for all sites that are not in the first and second list, it would treat it as a delivery weight of 1 as the target. Now over time, if we learned that the 2 site lists that you had created a delivery model for, there wasn't enough inventory, more budget would be reallocated dynamically to the sort of catch-all default. But that's how you would set it up.
All right, and JM has come in just under the wire with a final follow-up question. Is default mandatory or can it be disabled?
It is mandatory. So it is a mandatory, in order for sort of our pacing to be really accurate, all inventory needs to be accounted for somehow in the model. And so it is a required field.
All right. Well, I want to thank Shamim for doing this webinar, and thank all of you for attending and asking some really thoughtful questions. We'll be doing more of these types of webinars in the coming months to help all of you understand the great new things we're building here at Beeswax to help you guys be more successful. So there will be a recording of this webinar, and we'll go ahead and circulate it to those of you who could join and those who couldn't. We can make that shareable as well. And there are some links that Shamim had shared on the slides that will ensure are part of that email that we'll send you with the recording. So thanks everyone again, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks everyone. Thanks for your thoughtful questions.